guy. It's almost like he just didn't want to deal with this whole thing. He tried to get Paul to go to Jerusalem. That didn't work. Paul appealed to Caesar, so let's send him that way. So it just seems to be any way that I can get Paul out of my sights, all the better. So a few days after this had taken place, King Agrippa and his wife Bernice show up. And they meet Festus, and Festus explains to them what has been happening with this Paul character. I opened the court, brought Paul in, and there were the Jews. They were accusing him of things I did not expect, centering around this dead Jesus who Paul says is alive. I didn't know how to handle this, and I asked Paul if he wanted to go to Jerusalem for a trial. He said no, and appealed to Caesar, and now he is currently in custody. Kind of a quick summation of what just happened in the previous verses there. But he does bring up an interesting point that does stick out, because he's noting the accusations. He's noting the accusations of the Jews bringing against Paul. They're bringing up these things that I didn't expect. And I'm sure Festus was thinking, okay, Paul's been in prison for 2 years, and he's been on court, and maybe it was just a tough case that Felix just couldn't handle it. So maybe there is something to this, so let's see what it has to say. And then the Jews start opening up, and he's thinking, is that it? That's all you guys have? It has nothing to do with Roman law? It's just some disagreements about your religion? Is that all we're dealing with right now? And it does go on to say that, yeah, disagreements about the religion and about a certain dead man, Jesus, who Paul asserted to be alive. But Paul had always brought Jesus into the picture. Every time that he talked, it was about Jesus. Now, as Festus said, is Jesus being dead, but he wasn't dead. Paul had seen Jesus on the road to Damascus. Jesus had come to the side of Paul a couple previous chapters ago, and so Jesus was alive. And so the charges that were brought up, they weren't really listed, but it does go into the fact that Jesus is the center of all this. And Paul makes that mention many times in his letters. If there is no Jesus, there is no Christianity. Our faith is dead. And so Paul brings it, and this is being brought up by Festus, so it must have been something to the fact that it's centered around this conversation about Jesus. And that's what we can look back to see when Jesus was crucified. There was such an uproar about him. In the same way now it's being an uproar about Paul, because Paul's not preaching Paul. Paul is preaching Jesus. So that's the difference. If Paul was preaching Paul, it would have been just, okay, you're a nut. Let's just do away with you. But Paul was preaching Jesus. And this is what he was getting because of it. So King Agrippa says, hey, that sounds like some good entertainment. I might like to hear what Paul has to say. How about Friday, 8 o'clock, we go out to dinner, and then we can bring Paul in and see what he has to say. But so the next day, with all this lively introduction, King Agrippa and Bernice enter the auditorium along with the commanders and the big important people of the city. And we've seen this before. If there's any event such as the Olympics or an inauguration or a wedding for that matter, there's always this whole procession going in. There's people lining on either side. You probably hear cheers. There's probably music going on in the background. People are looking at the center of attention, and it's usually the people that are walking in. And so we get this idea when we read this, we can kind of picture that that's what it's like. Somebody important is coming, and just the entrance becomes quite a show in itself. I mean, when I walked in here tonight, there was none of that, so you don't have to worry about me, being anybody important, but I kind of like it that way. It's okay. But here they are. They arrive, and they meet Festus. Festus has Paul brought in. And then something quite unusual takes place. I'm reading through this, and I've read through it a couple times, and it just seems kind of interesting that they would have this conversation like this. Because I don't know if I'd want to do this in front of people, admit what was going on. And it's almost as ridiculous, but Paul forced this with Festus when Festus didn't want to make a decision about Paul. Festus basically says to King Agrippa and everybody that's there, I agreed to send Paul to Caesar, but I just don't know what to write about him. So do you think maybe you could ask Paul some questions and maybe write my essay for me and then put it in that nice clear plastic binder And if you could have it on my desk by 7 o'clock in the morning, that would just be wonderful. I mean, just give me something to write, something that I can use, because I have really nothing. And then the chapter ends with that. So it's kind of one of those where we had a couple chapters ago where he just leaves you there with, okay, and then that's it, and then chapter 26. But, good news. You guys can go home and read chapter 26 tonight, and I don't think there will be any problem with that. You can move on ahead if you like. But here in chapter 25, that's where it ends, is that Festus saying, it seems absurd to me in sending a prisoner not to indicate also the charges against him. Yes, that would seem absurd. And it does seem kind of absurd that Festus is basically proclaiming this in the auditorium, in earshot of all these important people and commanders, basically saying, I don't know what to do. Can you help me out, King Agrippa? Because I really can't. I don't know. Such a contrast, as I said before, between Paul and Festus. Because that's what I was thinking about as I was going through chapter 25. I'm just thinking about, here's this Festus guy, and he just can't make a decision. But we got to understand, there's a political background in all of this that we don't really see looking through Acts chapter 25. There was civil unrest in Judea. There were robbers, there were thieves, there were murderers, there were bandits that were going around the countryside and terrorizing the villages. Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. And so Festus comes to this area about 8 to 10 years before that event occurred. Now, any time that you have a city that's destroyed, it is not something that just happens overnight. It's not something where people just wake up and go, yeah, that place, I'd like to destroy that place, let's go get it. It happens over a period of time. It grows, it brews, so this thing has been brewing for a long time, probably a lot longer than 8 to 10 years. And so all this civil unrest there in Judea is happening now under Festus. He is brought in to replace Felix. Felix was just kind of a lame duck governor. And now Festus is brought in, and there's political pressure by the Roman government to keep the peace. The Roman government prided themselves in that. The lands that they conquered, they wanted to keep the peace. Unfortunately for them, when they conquered the Jewish nation, you had a lot of the Jewish people believing that they had special circumstances. And how could they not think that? Because they grew up, as we read in the Old Testament, being the chosen people of God, and now they're on the authority of the Roman government. And so they were resisting the Roman government. And so this Paul guy put Festus in a pickle, in a sense. Felix didn't do anything with him for 2 years, and so now it falls in the lap of Festus. Not much is known about Festus except for the details that we read here toward the end of Acts. He inherits a problem that is causing lots of anger with the Jews. He has a requirement to make Judea a peaceful place. So he understands that the situation out there, he understands his job and what he needs to do. The right thing to do, however, would be to release Paul. Would it not? You've heard the charges. I can't find anything that would warrant what they're asking to do to Paul. He's not done anything. He hasn't broken any Roman law. He says it himself. There's just some disagreements about their religion and about this Jesus guy. That's it. And so the right thing to do would be to release Paul. But can you imagine what would happen if he did that? I think Paul would probably be running for his life at that point, because if the Jews have already made it up in their mind that they would ambush Paul and attack him by just bringing him to Jerusalem, I don't think Festus would have just sent Paul to Jerusalem. Okay, just give me a call when you get there. Let me know everything's okay. I think there probably would have been an escort. And so if the Jews were accounting for the fact that, we're ready to lose a few, probably, to take out Paul. If they've already probably thought that through in their mind, that we're willing to take out whoever and whatever and do whatever it takes to destroy Paul, then we're going to do it. If they've already made that up in their mind, I can imagine if Paul was released at Caesarea and Paul was let go, it would have just been, okay. I think Paul would be probably getting out there in the middle of the night and seeing where he could escape to. Not saying that that's, a good enough explanation for not doing the right thing. I'm just thinking that, I'm sure that was on Festus's mind. Thinking that, one, this is not going to really go well for Paul. Two, this is not going to go well for the civil peace in the whole area of Judea. This is probably just going to make it even worse. I mean, I can't imagine the Jews would hear of this thinking, well, I've come to my decision, and Paul is acquitted of all charges. And the Jews take their briefcases and they slap them together and they go, well, win some, lose some, let's go back to Jerusalem. Wait, that worked out pretty good there, yeah? I think they had that little song, they were singing it back as they were walking back there. I don't think they would have been doing that. I think they would have been figuring out, okay, it didn't work this way, what are we going to do now? And it probably wouldn't have gone well between the relationship with Festus and the Jews. Because now you just did something for Paul and you slighted the Jews. Oh, so you're our new governor now, and this is how you treat us? Okay, get ready. Because the next few years of your reign is going to be very, very difficult. So Festus would have had a big problem on his hands. So Festus asked Paul, he defers to him, would you like to go on trial in Jerusalem? It had to have been something, I don't know, did Festus think about it as it was leaving his mouth? They say, well, he's here on trial, why would I say something ridiculous like that? But I think he was just trying for anything. Hey, would you, by any chance, like to go to Jerusalem? Go there? Paul says, no, I'm on trial right now. We're here. I want to do it now. Here I am. What's the problem with today? What is the problem with today? If we get on a side note, a side tangent, it seems like that oftentimes. Boy, it's so, when you talk about Jesus in the Bible, it does seem so convincing. Just not ready yet. What's the problem with today? Is there something holding you back from believing that the Bible's true? Is there something holding you back from trusting in Jesus and believing that He is alive? What's wrong with today? I can imagine Paul looking at Festus going, what's wrong with deciding today? I don't know, maybe Paul saw it in his eyes. Because Festus doesn't respond after that. Paul just continues on. He explains that, hey, I'm here, I'm not afraid to die, I haven't done anything worthy of death, and he doesn't give Festus really a chance after that. Festus says, you want to go to Jerusalem? Paul responds, no, I appeal to Caesar. I'm going to Rome. That's where I'm going. In a sense, I can imagine there was some relief for Festus. Probably heard that and went, well, at least he's going somewhere and not staying here in Caesarea. And maybe these Jews bringing all these charges can finally leave my town and get out of here, and maybe we can have some peace finally. So I can imagine there was maybe some relief there. Festus probably had a big sigh because it was a chance to get Paul out of his hair, but now it creates a new problem for him. Now he has to come up with something. He has to come up with a written statement of the charges against Paul to Caesar, the big guy, the top man, the emperor. You're sending Paul to Caesar. You don't just send Paul to Caesar saying, well, I'm here. So what are you doing here? Festus sent me. And because, he didn't really give me anything. He just sent me. Boy, if there was a phone there in the, right there in the center of Rome, get Festus on the phone. I need to talk to this guy. Every governor knew that if you sent somebody to Rome to be heard by Caesar, you better have a written statement of what these charges are. And so, in one breath, Festus is probably kind of relieved that he's going to Rome. And then in the next breath is, what do I say? This is a tough one. Only one problem. What do I write? It's not a bout of writer's block where Festus stayed up all night writing a long college essay due in the morning. I remember doing that. I remember being in college, and I would wait till the last minute, and I would sit there, and I think it was kind of like motivation for me, because if I tried to write any paper 2 or 3 weeks beforehand, it just seemed like there was no pressure there, and I just couldn't write. I'd just sit there and stare at the screen, Whew, got that down. When you're kind of under the gun, you know that you have 6 hours in the middle of the night, and I got to fill these pages with something. So you used to start going to town. And I remember printing my paper out, at 7 o'clock in the morning. I remember one instance where the printer wasn't working, and then that's when panic really set in, because you realize, classes this time, printer's not working, what am I going to do? I ended up solving it, I don't know how, because I guess I'm here today, and I didn't get arrested for throwing any equipment out in the middle of the street, but thank goodness I was able to manage some level of self-control. But Festus, it's not something where you stayed up long all night wondering what to write. No, this was a case where he literally had nothing to write. What do I say? Paul was a very, 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 very bad man. No. Paul made the Jews mad. No. Paul did not shave. No, I can't do that. Paul will not stop talking about this Jesus guy. No, that won't work. I don't even know if he got that far of thinking these things, because it says he comes up to King Agrippa and basically says, could you help me out with this? Tell you what, you check him out and you tell me what you come up with. That's Festus. He had his political career that he was concerned about. He had the people above him in the Roman government that was applying pressure to him. That he inherited a bad situation there in Caesarea and Judea, and it was getting worse. It was only, like I said, 8 to 10 years later that Jerusalem was destroyed. He's very close to that. And so he has a lot of pressure politically and on his career. And then at the same time, the people that he's ruling over, he has a lot of pressure with that. I'm not really making excuses. I'm just saying that he just didn't seem to be one of those people where he just came in and took charge. He's not one of those John Wayne governors, He didn't just walk in there, right, now this is this, and you guys, we're going to do the right thing here, and you're going to be quiet about it. And if there's any unrest, well then that's why we have the Roman military here to take care of matters. You don't see any of that. It just seemed to be this back and forth. I just got here. I don't want to make the Jews mad. I have Paul. What do I do with Paul? Thanks a lot, Felix. He's probably calling Felix every night. Thanks. And it just hangs up on him. You left me with Paul. He just kind of has this back and forth. I don't know what to do. Paul, on the other hand, is patient. It has been 2 years being brought in every so often by Felix. You want to give me some money to get out of here? I bet he could have. I bet he had enough people, Christians and believers on the outside that probably would have taken an offering for him. Paul didn't do it. No, he was patient. He was waiting it out. He understood his rights as a Roman citizen. He is not afraid to die. I wonder if that crossed Festus' mind. I wonder if he was thinking, boy, if these Jewish leaders want to take out Paul, I wonder if they're plotting to take me out too. I wonder if I'd let Paul go, if I'd be next on their hit list. Because there are bandits that are roaming around the countryside that are terrorizing the villages. I wonder if they would just hire some mercenaries and they would take me out. Or I wonder if I would fail as a governor and the emperor would have me for lunch. I wonder about that. And then here's Paul standing on trial, standing before him, basically saying, I'm not afraid to die. He refutes the charges that were brought against him. He plays his ace card. I appeal to Caesar. That was his right. He could use it, and he did. And I don't think it showed any weakness in Paul. I think Paul was just kind of fed up with the fact that, you know what, you guys aren't doing anything about it. How about this? How about Caesar? Let's take it to the big show. I mean, you just get this picture that Festus did not know what to do, and that Paul knew exactly what to do. It's such a contrast between those two. Like I said before, Paul was not preaching Paul. Paul was preaching Jesus. And when people come in contact with Jesus, it forces the issue. Let's look at Hebrews chapter 4, verse 12. We'll end with this. Here in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 12, it says, "For the word of God is living and active and sharper than any two-edged sword, and piercing as far as the division of soul and spirit, of both joints and marrow, and able to judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart." And I can imagine when people are coming in contact with Paul, it just makes this uneasiness about him. Because they know that they have to either go this way or this way. And they also know that there's probably going to be trouble in both decisions that they make. Because think about it. I mean, anytime somebody does make a decision to say, you know what, I'm going to follow Jesus. I'm sure in some instances there's a lot of people that are happy for that person. But imagine that person and all of the group of people, either family or friends, that he or she used to spend time with. And then, when they become a Christian, they go back to tell them, I'm not going to do the things with you like I normally did. You know, maybe I'll go get coffee with you, maybe I'll do this, but I'm not going to go do these things. And the question will come up, well, why? Well, because I'm a Christian now. I follow Jesus, and he's important to me, and he wants me to do these things. Most of the time, those people aren't just going to go, oh, great, you know, I'm so happy for you. I think they're going to be a little upset. What are you talking about? Just last Friday, we were having a great time together, and now you're telling me, and it's almost a level they'll probably feel guilty. Oh, you're coming in here to tell me how great you are? I think there's going to be a little bit of trouble. And if that person does not decide to follow Jesus, there may not be trouble right away, but there's going to be trouble waiting for you in eternity. So either way about it, a decision has to be made about Jesus. And either way about it, there is going to be some trouble that comes with it. The trouble is not going to come from Jesus. The trouble is going to be coming from the fact that now you're standing out. You're sticking out like Paul was sticking out. But there was Paul, standing there, confident, speaking, defending himself. I'm not afraid to die. And there's Festus just going, I don't know what to write. What do I write? I don't know. Caesar's going to be mad at me. He's going to have my job. Goodness gracious, what do we do? Agrippa, thank goodness you're here. I've got to talk to you. Please help me write something. And Paul just, hey, let's go to Rome. Let's take care of this now. Jesus will always force the issue when it comes either following him or not. The Bible will always force that issue. But I look at these two individuals, Festus and Paul. Festus died a few years later after this. He didn't last very long. Who knows if what he heard caused him to make a decision or not? Maybe even a decision regarding his eternity. We don't know. We'll know once we see eternity. But we definitely know about Paul. And Paul, I bet, if we took all of the letters that he wrote, and I bet if we counted how many times Jesus' name was brought up, I bet we could just have dozens, if not hundreds of verses. Just lay down, wow, Jesus. And it's amazing. Because why do we get away from that? Why do we get away from the topic of Jesus? Is it uncomfortable? I can see how it is. But Paul never got away from it. Paul was always correcting. And he was always correcting, pointing back to, why is it that you already left him? It was just like Festus said. Yeah, they kind of just haggled over some of these disagreements over his religion. Oh, and this Jesus guy, that's right. Jesus. Didn't list off any of the specifics of the disagreements, but Jesus came up. I'm sure Paul was talking about it all the time. And the great part is, as we get into chapter 26, we'll get to see that even more. And Jesus said, Paul, you've spoken what you need to speak in Jerusalem, and now you're going to do the same in Rome. But Paul always had Jesus at the center. There was never anything about Paul where you could just say, boy, I just don't know what's going on with Paul today. No, he wasn't afraid to die. He wasn't afraid what people were going to do to him. But Jesus was always at the center of his drive. Now I think that's encouraging for us because I think we can have Jesus at the center of our drive. It doesn't matter what's going to happen to us. Jesus has already taken care of our eternity.